carefree, bright, bouncy little piece. And then in the middle, when we get over to F, we get on the C. And what we're looking for here is the rise and boat on the ocean. And then we'll DC back to the beginning and go back to the sprightly little marching tune. I'd like you to play all the dotted eighth notes, like the first note on the short side. Don't play the long dotted eighth notes. And this is yum, dum, dum, ding. Okay? All the time, all the way through.
There's a place right there.
There you go.
I don't believe what happened 2 years ago, but I'm sure we will. And it's really exciting to be able to see all of you again. Some new faces from the last group 2 years ago. In fact, several people said, you remember last year? It went by so fast, didn't it? Yeah. Some of you haven't changed a bit. We're going to start off with Semper Fidelis. One of the most important things also is not to just splat at notes. Many of the stingers are, and when we stop together. When we start together. When I step on the podium, it's to ready position. When I raise the baton, it's to play position, if you have it for 2 years either. And play position. First note and hold it. First note and hold it. please. May I have the brass pickups into D, third valve. Hold it down. Try it one, if you will, Paul. Yeah, let's try one. 1, 2, 1. Not all the instruments are made the same. That's the effect we wanted to get. Let's try it again. Now, where are you going to breathe? Take a look. No, can't. So if you're going to have to breathe before we finish,
I would like to hear the last note of the song, Four Count.
Didn't recognize you.
And the 35th year of Lakeview High School Band. We are especially pleased to welcome alumni to the second annual Alumni Band Festival, and to all parents and friends of the band, we issue a warm welcome. Our program begins with the dynamic music of Alfred Reed. This selection will be conducted by Arthur Dries, who is the Associate Director of Bands at Lakeview. Mr. Dries is a graduate of East Detroit High School, Wayne State University, and has taught at Lakeview since 1963. Please welcome Mr. Dries and the Lakeview Band. selection in 1976 and again in 1981, as well as this year. This selection will be conducted by Mr. Jack D. Ellis, Director of Bands at Lakeview. Mr. Ellis is a graduate of Livonia Bentley High School, an honors graduate of Western Michigan University, and received a Master's of Music from Wayne State University. Mr. Ellis has been the Assistant Director of the Lakeview Band from 1974 and has been Director of Bands at Lakeview since 1983. Please welcome Mr. Ellis. selection will be conducted by Thomas V. Corse. Mr. Corse is a graduate of the University of Michigan. He has taught in Onstead and Pontiac, as well as the 11 years he spent as director of bands and orchestra at Lakeview, 1972 to 1983. Mr. Corse is the instrumental music department chair for the Birmingham schools and is band director at Seaholm High School. It is our great pleasure to welcome Mr. Corse back to the podium of the Shawman Auditorium. Mr. Corse.
I'd like to thank you for asking me back again. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to tell you briefly about the piece we're going to play for you now. The Irish Tune from County Derry is one of many folk songs that were collected by the Australian musician and composer Percy Grainger. You know the piece by a couple of other names, I'm sure, the Londonderry Air, and most popularly as Danny Boy. And just to give you something of the flavor of the piece, Danny Boy is a father's song to his son. I don't know what you thought it was, but that's in reality what it's about. And it's about a father's lament to his son who has been taken away to war and will never again return to Ireland. And it's kind of a melancholy and sad song. And it's one of the most beautiful melodies that I think we have in our literature, and it's a pleasure to bring it to you this afternoon. The Irish Tune from County Derry, arranged by Percy Grainger.
Silver Screen. Selections include Tara's Theme, 42nd Street, Born Free, Merrily We Roll Along, A Summer Place, Swanee, and many more. We are delighted to feature many of our fine seniors as soloists during this selection. Martin Sleminski, trumpet soloist, Tom Bakaru, baritone soloist, and Sharon Durr and Cynthia Cole, flute soloists. Fillmore's music has often been performed by the Lakeview Band, including Lazarus trombone in 1984 and klaxon in 1985. Mr. Jack D. Metz will direct the band in this composition. Mr. Metz was the single guiding light and mentor that created the Lakeview Band. He was the band director here from 1954 to 1971 and was instrumental in the design and the building of the auditorium in which you are seated today. Mr. Metz was renowned for his total dedication to the band and to Lakeview, as well as for his deep care and concern for his students and parents. Please welcome back to the podium of Lakeview High School, Mr. Jack Metz. of you are aware by now, the Lakeview Band has received the singular honor of being invited to participate in the festivities surrounding the relighting of the Statue of Liberty. On July the 4th, 5th, and 6th, the band will gather at the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, march to the Federal Building across from the Stock Exchange, and present a 30-minute concert. In addition to these performances, the band will be honored by being invited to play for the award ceremony for the Tall Ships on Sunday evening, July the 6th, and will be on the Intrepid, welcoming guests to that ceremony. Our invitation is due not just to the hard work of the current Lakeview Band, but is fundamentally due to the incredibly hard work and devotion of every Lakeview Band member and parent in the 35 years of existence of the Lakeview Band. It is fitting, therefore, that we present a preview performance of music that will be performed at Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, our first president. American Overture for Band was the opening selection from our 1986 marching competition show. Please welcome back Mr. Ellis to the podium. Appropriate to be selected as the closing selection for our 1985 marching show. You will certainly recognize many of the selections from the movie. This selection is based on the German hymn tune, Praise to the Almighty. We are pleased to welcome a number of our alumni who are joining with us for the finale to this stirring and moving selection. There will be a 15-minute intermission. Please take the opportunity to look at the items.
Can I squeeze through here? Shouldn't bother anything? You're not shooting, are you? Song was written by an alumni of Lakeview High School. It is therefore appropriate that the music be conducted by an alumni of Lakeview, Thomas Plager. Mr. Plager graduated from Lakeview in 1958 and is a graduate of Wayne State University. He has taught in Lakeview since 1963. Please welcome Mr. Plager to the podium. Was a notable English composer of this century. He often used old British folk songs as part of his composition, and Sea Songs is based on an old English sailor song. Mr. Corse has been active in introducing the music of Vaughan Williams and his compatriot, Gustav Holst, to the band at Lakeview. And it is proper that we welcome Mr. Corse to the podium for Sea Songs. This lovely arrangement was performed at the first Alumni Band Festival in 1984. We are pleased to present it again this year. This selection will be conducted by Marilyn Bryce Harvey. Mrs. Harvey was hired by Mr. Schaubel as the first band director in the fall of 1949, and she worked in all Lakeview schools, generating the first Lakeview bands until 1954. We are delighted to welcome to the stage of Schaubel Auditorium, Lakeview's first band director, Mrs. Harvey. to be complete without the music of John Philip Sousa. And inasmuch as many in our area call the current Lakeview band the Marines, it is not surprising that we play the official march of the United States Marine Corps. It is also appropriate that we feature this selection and dedicate its performance to Lakeview's new and excellent principal, Mr. John DeGrandis. We are pleased to welcome to the podium again, Mr. Metz.
In a year of patriotism and national fervor, it is appropriate that a band that has always waved the flag and been proud of red, white, and blue conclude its program with America the Beautiful and the Stars and Stripes Forever. The Carbon Dragon arrangement of America the Beautiful has been performed regularly by Lakeview Band since Mr. Metz first introduced it to Lakeview audiences in the early 1960s. The current Lakeview Band will close each of its programs in New York City this July with this emotional and beautiful selection. Mr. Metz will direct the band and the audience in this selection. Please welcome again Mr. Metz to the podium.
I would be remiss if I didn't make a very short statement prior to the conclusion of the program. I'm sure all of you can appreciate the fantastic amount of effort, coordination to cause this day to come about. My special personal thanks to all of the participants on stage, both alumni and present band, and to all of you who are present in the audience. Very emotional and satisfying afternoon. I want to challenge all of you, those in the audience and those on the stage who are now taxpayers and parents in the Lakeview district, to witness that which is taking place today in this beautiful auditorium, in this testament to the community. These things don't just happen, and they won't continue without your complete and total support. And I'm sure that in the near future there will be appeals made to you for bond issues or millage elections for the continuance of the fine education program. I challenge you to accept that and to see that this kind of day continues. Thank you for inviting me and the others to your celebration. And now, America the Beautiful.
express our appreciation to our special guests who are with us. First of all, our band has been so successful, such a caring organization for so many years, not just because of the students or the directors or the administration or school board. The real reason for our success is the parents, people that have made our program work. Today I'd like to recognize all the parents that are present, current as well as past. Please stand so that we can give you the ovation that you so richly deserve. Parents. We have been very lucky over the many years of the Lakeview Band to have many wonderful families in our organization, and I would be very remiss today if I did not recognize the 3 families that we have here today that have 4 members of their family back in our alumni band today. I'd like to call on them to stand: the Preston family, the Case family, and the Decker family. We also have alumni here today from Florida, Texas, California, New Hampshire, California, and Ohio. And I'd like to ask those folks to please stand. A special dedication to the Lakeview Band to be back here from all those miles. I was disappointed Mr. Metz didn't ask all the people that were married to each other and married Lakeview Band alumni, and so I get to do that today. And I'd like to ask the folks that married other Lakeview Band members or are soon going to marry Lakeview Band alumni. May stand now, please. We have a first at our alumni band today. We have 2 families that are sharing the stage, parents and children that are currently in the band. And this is the Ian and Monty Smith and their daughter Heather, Barbara Jenkins and her daughter Tracy. I'd like to ask all those people to stand. I'd like to express our appreciation today to Mr. Fred Zilke, who was our narrator. Mr. Zilke has taught at Lakeview High School since 1966. While he was a teacher at Lakeview, Mr. Zilke's Honors American History class was probably the single most popular class at Lakeview High School for the standards that he required, for the intellectual ability and talent that he brought to the class, his marvelous voice, and incredible challenge to all the students who were in that class. And obviously a few of them in the band sat through that history class. Mr. Zilke, since January, has become the assistant principal at Lakeview High School. Please join with me in honoring Mr. Zilke. Mr. Robert Sugar was a teacher of the year, coach, assistant principal, and finally principal at Lakeview High School from 1977 until January 1986. Mr. Sugar was an exemplary leader of our school and maintained the high standards at a time when it was real easy to kind of say, forget it, it's not worth it. And instead, Mr. Sugar kept the standards high, and the standards that have made Lakeview one of the premier high schools in the state of Michigan today. Please join me in honoring Mr. Sugar. Robert Shawlin, I'd like to quote from the words in the plaque in the lobby. Mr. Robert H. Shawlin, during his 28 years of devoted and dedicated service to Lakeview High School, 1949 to 1977, Mr. Shawlin provided students in the Lakeview community with the highest caliber of educational and moral leadership. He encouraged an appreciation of the lasting values of extracurricular involvement and inspired students, families, and faculties to build and maintain Lakeview's reputation as Michigan's finest. He taught by what he said, by what he did, and by what he was. Join with me in welcoming Mr. Robert H. Shawlin, educator, principal, and leader. I'd next like to call Mrs. Harvey forward as the person responsible for taking the Lakeview Band to the crucible of childhood. All parents, directors, and students owe to her our heartfelt appreciation for a job and a task well done. Mrs. Harvey.
Everyone that had introduced me being a band director at Lakeview. This is part of my life that I'll always remember. It's a thrill to be here and an honor to be asked. Thank you very much.
Mr. Giacomet's a strong man, a strong leader, a caring teacher. He was Teacher of the Year at Lakeview High School, a class sponsor, the man that brought fame and renown to all of Lakeview by his dedicated work for the Lakeview Band. It is our privilege to welcome you back and to express our heartfelt appreciation for your lasting contribution to the Lakeview family. Mr. Metz. Mr. Thomas Kors has left us such a marvelous legacy, memories of consummate musicianship, a brilliant record of marching bands matched by few bands in this state, beautiful bands, orchestras, and jazz bands that were produced on a regular basis at Lakeview, and a caring and dedication for the parents and the teachers. I'd like to now call Mr. Kors forward so that we can recognize his many years of service. Every parent, every student, teacher, administrator has been honored by the invitation of the current Lakeview Band to appear in New York City. We are humbled, very proud of receiving this invitation, and we are very appreciative to everybody who made the reputation, made the Lakeview Band what it was, so that we would be fortunate enough to accept the invitation on behalf of all of the Lakeview Band members. Your moral support, your financial support, your prayers and best wishes are sincerely required to make our dream possible and to be the success that we hope for it to be. We appreciate your attendance today and your continued support of our program. Thank you very much.
We have one more rose that we would like to give to the man who is taking the Lakeview Band to New York for his hard work, motivation, and dedication. To Jackie Ellis.
Behind every composition, there is a story. This story occurred in 1897, as John Philip Sousa was returning from Europe due to the sudden death of his manager. Sousa recalled, "As the vessel steamed out of the harbor, I was pacing the deck, absorbed in thoughts of my manager's death, and the many duties and decisions which awaited me in New York. Suddenly, I began to sense the rhythmic beat of a band playing in my brain. It kept on ceaselessly, playing, playing, playing. Throughout the whole tense voyage, that imaginary band continued to unfold the same themes, echoing and re-echoing, the most distinct melody. I did not transfer a note of that music to paper while I was on the steamer, but when we reached shore, I set down the measures that my brain band had been playing to me, and not a note of it had ever been changed." By now, you have possibly guessed that Sousa was composing the most famous march ever written. Please welcome again Mr. Ellis and the combined bands as they perform for us the Stars and Stripes Forever.